Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
The city, for the credibility of office holders, city officials, and the city itself. So,
thank you.
We would invite you to make an opening statement.
Sure.
Introduce yourself to us, if you would, please. Tell us about your position with the city of Sioux Falls and why you are bringing forth this request for an advisory opinion.
Thanks, Jeff. My name is Jeff Eckhoff. I'm the current Director for Planning and Development Services. This is my 8th week.
But this is New York City.
Yeah. It's like,
we hear sirens.
well, that was quick action. I guess that's a no.
I'm going to turn that volume just a little bit.
This is my 8th week on the job. And early on, in the process of getting appointed, people would call and, offer congratulations. And one of those conversations I had was with Steve Colbeck, who is the government affairs guy for XL Energy. And I've been a long-serving member on their advisory board. And the purpose, North Dakota has a board, South Dakota has a board. The purpose is to inform and educate business leaders, educational leaders, and policy people. So there's always a couple of legislators on the board. There's typically been a city council person. I think Kenny served for a while, and I think Rick currently serves in the past. And again, just to inform people. So there's generally 2 meetings a year. This summer meeting is usually in Minneapolis. We've toured nuclear plants, we've toured wind plants, generation facilities. We toured the underground substation out in downtown Minneapolis, which was fascinating. The whole purpose is to just raise the awareness of what XL is doing, particularly, I think, to try to educate people on renewables and where they are in that movement towards their portfolio. And then the second day up there, we always got to meet with the CEO, just have breakfast and just talk about issues that related to South Dakota, what was important to us, what things that we see coming. And I served initially as an economic development representative on the Development Foundation, and through many years there was somebody from the Development Foundation. Dan Scott served for a while, Dan Hemiork, and then myself. And so I've continued in that role through that. Well, with this appointment, I was talking to Stacy at one of the directors' meetings, and because they had asked me, "Are you gonna be able to continue to serve? What's the deal?" I said, "Well, I'd like to, because it's very informative, and I enjoyed learning." But there's sorry to jump around. There's 2 meetings a year. The one in the summer has often been in Minneapolis, not always. It's usually a 2-day meeting, and then there's usually one in the fall or the winter, and that's always in Sioux Falls, and that's a half-a-day meeting, a 1-day meeting. There's a stipend that they pay. It's $250 a day, so the maximum we've ever gotten is like $750 a whole year. But I would waive that in this position if I were able to participate. And so it just was an interesting conversation to see whether it was something that this board thought was acceptable, and I'm certainly fine with it either way. I have served a long time, so I've been able to get a lot of information. So if I don't continue to serve, it's not a huge thing to me, but I do have an interest in that, so I thought I'd ask.
So the compensation is $250 a day. So if you're making a trip to Minneapolis, it's 2 days.
2 days, yeah.
So it's
Right.
$500.
Right, for that meeting, and then the one in the fall, that's the 1 day, is the 1 day. So the most I've ever received was $750 a year.
Okay. And do they also pay travel expenses?
Yes, they pay travel expenses, they provide the meals and the hotel, even if you go to Minneapolis.
Can you give us an estimate of what that would be?
Oh, that's a good question.
The 2 meetings? So hotels, mileage, and...
Yeah, so in town there's no cost to it, because they just hold it at their off. I mean, I never received mileage for that. So there would be, they used to fly us up there, so whatever round trip ticket would be, probably $400 or $500 maybe. The last couple of years they took a charter bus, and so there'd probably be a dozen of us on the bus, however that would work out, whatever that, I don't know what that rate was. And we usually stay in a downtown hotel, so I'm guessing you're talking 120-ish. I don't know if they might have had a corporate rate, but they just took care of the bills, so we never saw it. And then the meals would be whatever. Oftentimes we'd stop somewhere along the way to see one of their projects, and there'd be a restaurant in that town. So,
Mr. Eckhoff, can you tell us, based on your experience being on the South Dakota Advisory Board for the past 8 or 9 years, what do you think from the perspective of Excel? What is the purpose of the board from Excel standpoint? Why do they have such a board?
They have it to inform policymakers and business leaders just of what they're doing. It's just an effort to reach out. So it's two ways. They want input back from us. What do we see? What do we hear? In particular, if there's issues around PUC, if you remember, there was a contentious PUC race, and they were just kind of curious, what are you hearing? What's the message? How can we better communicate with our customers? And what are the needs of our customers? So they want that information from us. And they also want us just to be aware of what they're doing. As you know, there's been a big push in renewables, for example. So they want us to see the wind farm. They want us to understand the cost of siting a nuclear plant and some of the renewals that they have in their permits over there and how that all works.
If you would, would you clarify and spell out for us, what is the relationship between XL Energy and the city of Sioux Falls? And you as planning director, what is your role in that relationship?
Well, and that's a really good question. That's one of the things Steve and I talked about initially. So their role is they're an investor-owned utility, and they are the primary electricity provider for the city of Sioux Falls. The city of Sioux Falls, of course, has its own electric department and serves like around the Denny and some of that area. And they buy their wholesale power, I believe, from Madison, Heartland. So what could happen, and now as I've been in this position for a couple months, there certainly could be issues with permitting, there could be issues with right-of-way and that type of thing, although most of that's pretty well established. And so as I've gone down the path and been in this job, I can probably see potential conflicts down the road, probably clearer than I did a month and a half ago when Stacey and I first started talking about this.
How would you manage those potential conflicts?
Well, initially, you think it's pretty simple. You just recuse yourself from it, right? But when you're the director of the department, that gets a little bit harder to do, right? And so that becomes the rub. In fact, Stacey and I had a conversation a couple days ago about was maybe I should just pull this from the agenda because the more I think about it, maybe it's probably not likely, probably not probable that there'd ever be a conflict, but it could be. And the perception is, we don't want the perception of it either. So I'm just being very upfront with you on that.
Very good. Let's open up the floor for questions from other members of the board. Greg, can you hear us okay?
Well, I think there's some.
Well, I think he's able to hear us. Greg? Oh, he's muted.
Okay.
Okay.
We're going to start with you, Greg. Could you? Go ahead, Greg. You have the floor.
I do have a question, Jack. Mr. Backhoff, give me this board is described as a board of directors, implying that the board actually gives direction to the entity to excel, but it sounds like there's actually more. It's more a conduit for Excel to disseminate information to a group of community leaders who are in key positions that would be important for them to understand. So it's as much like an educational thing. Can you give me just your estimate of percentage? What percentage of the effort and the meeting in your experience has been this board giving direction to Excel, and what percentage has been Excel giving information to the group hopefully for dissemination to the general public?
That's a great question. Thanks, Greg. First of all, I think Excel would characterize it as an advisory board. We can only wish we sat on the big board, but no, it's an advisory board. In regards to the ratio of dissemination versus input, there's always open discussion back and forth, but the actual time that we get set aside when we're in Minneapolis to actually sit down, and often the CEO and maybe the CFO are in the room, that's over a breakfast. So if you parcel out the time, probably that access to those folks is maybe 5% of the whole year, 10% maybe, because it's usually about an hour that we get with them.
Thank you.
further questions, Greg, before we continue around the table?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Jeff, what's you?
I have, sir,
Yes.
one question. You mentioned earlier the permit process. Can you explain to us what your role or influence is if Xcel Energy were ever to submit a permit that you made reference to?
So if they were to come in and apply for a permit to build something, as long as they're meeting the zoning and all the, I mean, it would just go through. I would never see it. You know, it's only when there's contention or there's a question or it's, you know, they request a variance perhaps. And then again, I have staff that directly handles that, but when you get to those types of things, they generally will run it past me. As we talk about when this goes to the Board of Adjustment, what type of recommendations we think we should have. Those type of things, we generally talk those through and I generally see those. So that would be, you know, it's like a lot of things, as long as things are going well, smooth. But if there had to be something that came up that they requested a variance or some change, and then I would be more involved with it. It's ultimately a board that makes that decision, as you know, but still, there's no doubt, and I wouldn't pretend that there isn't, that I can certainly influence staff's recommendation of that.
If you were to recuse yourself, who would step into your role to help kind of work through those conflicts or tensions or disagreements?
On zoning issues, that'd be the head of development services, Matt Tobias, because he'd be the next in line for that particular area.
And does he report to you?
Yes. And on the building permit side, it'd be Butch Warrington, who also reports to me.
Sue?
It's fuzzy, I know.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
first issue we had this year with the librarian, I don't believe the board she was involved with was going to cover any of her costs because she was going to anyway.
Correct.
This one, Excel would be paying travel expenses and providing meals, so that to me is one distinguisher here. He says he will not take the stipend, of course. That's similar to the library issue, but there are other expenses. On the one hand, I feel like the city benefits from the information that you're provided as you're looking at long-term planning for the city. On the other hand, are there other people in the city government who can fulfill that role just as well? Do we currently have a city council member on that board?
Yes, yeah, Councilor Kiley. I don't remember in the years I've served where we've ever had a city staff. So it's almost like a grandfather thing. I've been on the board, that's why they asked me. I don't think that, well, I know they didn't ask me because of my position, although that seemed to make some sense. And I think they've just stayed away from city staff for maybe this reason that we're discussing today. But it was the fact that I've been a long-serving member, I think, that carried this request today. So, and if it wasn't me, I don't think they'd be asking a city staff or director to participate. This is stuff you find out when you're the new guy, right?
Sue,
I have another question.
Go ahead.
Mr. Eckhoff, would there discuss the possibilities of the city actually covering your travel expenses? Is that something that you have appropriate budget for? I just wonder if we might avoid the appearance of impropriety. Someone, I mean, I happen to do a lot of business travel, and I don't consider business travel a benefit at all. It's a huge pain in the butt. But some other people disagree. Would you have a budget inside your department to cover those costs?
Yes, we have the money to cover that. I'll be honest with you though, in the scheme of things, as far as getting staff trained and other things, it'd be a pretty low priority for me. To the point where I just wouldn't go versus probably expending those funds rather than sending a staff for training or inspector to some type of conference where they would get more direct benefit for their particular job.
So you don't think it's an appropriate investment for the city to cover those expenses?
No, I don't think it's inappropriate. I just think it's very, very low priority.
Eckhoff, in those meetings, are you giving confidential information?
Not terribly. I mean, sometimes we'll talk about, like, for example, on their nuclear plants, kind of what their plan is going forward, what the cost might be, and recertifying those plants and that type of thing. I mean, everybody has like signed an NDA or say this is really confidential, but they will say sometimes, well, this is not for public consumption, but this is what our long-term plan is and that type of thing.
Okay, so it is expected that you will maintain a confidence with some information that's shared with you as a member of that advisory board.
Right, just from a, I'm sure, a competition standpoint. And of course, as you know, they have permitting with the PUC, and they don't want to get ahead of that in their process either.
Very good. Would it be a fair or unfair characterization to say that Xcel Energy's, one of their motivations for having an advisory board may be to build allies? Is that a fair or unfair?
That's very fair.
That's fair?
I think that's fair. Yeah.
I think maybe that now we turn to the city attorney and Mr. Parstra and ask him whether what is in the statute, what is in ordinance that is applicable here, as well as any previous opinions that may provide precedent.
Well, I mean, the relevant ordinances, and I'll spare you reading them. In fact, I think you've all had well-placed questions on those topics, but the ordinances themselves are 35.028, which is the conflicts of interest ordinance, acting in an official capacity on matters in which an official or employee has a private financial interest clearly separate from that of the general public. Per the questions that were discussed, and of course, Director Eckhoff's statement that he's declining in compensation and the stipend. What's left to you is what Mr. Ross mentioned about the expenses piece. But when it comes to 35.028, acceptance of gifts and other things of value, somewhat inherent in this conversation, and the section 7.01 of the charter on conflicts of interest, and then of course the Board of Ethics itself. And again, barring the need to read those, we've started the discussion regarding compensation and expenses. As often is the case in situations such as these, you look at that potential appearance of impropriety, what Director Eckhoff discussed. In any financial interest, you can determine from the facts whether there actually is a financial interest separate from that of the general public. Doesn't seem to be a major issue here. The two primary things, one is the ability to recuse, and the other, as I believe I've touched on previously, is a distinguishing characteristic of this from the other ones is the fact that he's a director. I think, again, you've covered kind of those areas in the law. I think you're at a point where factually decide some of those things. And from the prior opinions, I think the record is relatively clear that generally the Board of Ethics have allowed service on boards. Again, this one's unique to its facts. So in the event that the Board of Ethics would decide that the big differences are so great that it would lead you to another opinion, then at some point, from a legal point of view, we would want to address what commonly the law is, but you limit this to the facts. Because from a precedent point of view, it would be, it is rather different than where it's been in the past. Whether that's appropriate or not is for you to decide. But based on the facts, I think we've kind of covered the areas.
Would travel expenses be covered by the prohibition in statute?
As far as compensation goes,
Correct.
I don't think expenses qualifies compensation. I haven't researched that piece, but they're designed to offset costs as opposed to being income. And that's where you get from the IRS mileage regulations to this Director Eckhoff's testimony that they don't even see funds. He doesn't get a check reimbursing it, and under that factual construct, there's really no potential for him to pocket any money that, it's a $100 hotel room and he gets paid $120.
So 30.029, no officer or employee shall directly or indirectly solicit indicated accept. And whether in the form of money, services, loan, travel, entertainment, hospitality, thing, or promise, so on and so forth. So you're saying that this travel would not be covered by it?
You're in
30.029 does reference travel.
Well, the rest of that, you have to read the rest of that sentence too. Under circumstances in which it could be reasonably inferred that the gift was intended to influence the employee in the performance of their official duties. So it's not just that they're providing the travel benefit, it's that it's intended to influence the employee.
Well, what I would add, and sorry, I was looking at 30, you mentioned 35, or
It's 35.
yeah, it's 35. It also says that they're prohibited from soliciting. And you can, I guess you can.
Or accept.
On an annual basis.
Or accept them.
And I tend to look at that too, to distinguish those kind of gifts of travel that aren't related, as Stacy pointed out, to just a payment of the expenses to get to the board meeting. So if he gets a cruise, for example, that has nothing to do with his relationship with the board that he's serving on.
You're saying that would be inappropriate?
Yeah, a gift of a cruise would
Versus-
be where this is just an offset, paid, he never sees it, it's just to cover the expenses to get to the board meeting itself.
If it's helpful, I mean, the reason we go to Minneapolis is because A, that's where the headquarters is, and B, that's where a lot of the things they show us, the nuclear plants were there, the coal.
The issue that I have here is this, what Sue just pointed out is when the purpose is to influence. And I think we probably pretty well established that the entire purpose of having the board at all is to influence. And that's not negative, but that's a fact. If they didn't think they were giving influence, they wouldn't be talking to you.
Right. They're building allies, they're educating, but yeah, certainly they want you to understand what they're doing.
Mr. Eckhoff, what does your gut tell you about this matter?
Well, a month ago, I didn't think it was a big deal. No, just all kidding aside, I've thought about it some, and I do think that my gut tells me I don't think there's anything improper or wrong with it, but I do believe that the opportunity for perception and misperception is there, and therefore it makes me a little uneasy because of that. Because perception is very important to the reputation of the city and to myself personally, and I just think that's not something you want to trade away to be on the board, no matter how much you enjoyed it or felt you benefited from it.
As one member of this board, I would concur with your position that, in fact, there is the potential here for conflicts. That you said that, yes, Excel is one of the reasons why they have such an advisory board is to win over allies. And I'm not disparaging anybody's character or ethics, but it is what it is. And even you said that the value of serving on that board from a city perspective is not sufficient for you to even put in for travel reimbursement. So I see this situation as being problematic, and if I were to recommend my fellow board members a position we would take, I would say that there is at least the potential for a conflict of interest, and maybe there is a conflict of interest because you were there you are representing the city of Sioux Falls, and the interests of the city may be at odds at times with those of Excel Energy. Is that a fair character?
I think so. I think it's fair to say that the opportunities that Excel has been at odds or had something is probably not very often, if ever, but it just takes once, right? And I think.
And there's the appearance issue.
And where you're going, I think, is the proverbial, the juice probably isn't worth the squeeze, right?
Other members of the board, so forth.
I'd like to jump on their coattails and they said, I share that message with council secretaries and oftentimes say to a fellow practitioner who would ask a question, a comment that would be kind of off topic, but always is that was you had to ask how much you should do it. And it sounds to me like Mr. Harbaugh kind of already knows what he should do. And I would be most comfortable if you were say, I'm going to withdraw. I request because I don't want to do this. That means it's necessary for us to lie. But if you do have to lie, I think I got where I'm coming from.
I think that's right. One question I have is how this could impact other systems on the board. This is different than in 2003. They used to have spaces that were done and the city engineering. It was on a budget for water service or something like that. And we don't know all of that, but again, assuming we apply lives for influence, who's there as a city member, and this would be a different approach. And maybe others who are on board that now might prohibit it simply because there's that period for influence and time. So I just think that rather be careful on how this feels like the right approach to take, just withdraw, not part of the advisory board. We could have broader answers.
Well, my question is, if we were to issue an advisory opinion that there is a conflict of interest, why is this one conflict of interest? What we state as a fact that we're talking about a record? Because it seems like it's, as you said, it's different than past ones. And so is that.
Let me try to explain my position. XL agencies are different at times from those of the city. Mr. Eckroth, his position is his person largely responsible for managing the relationship between the primary utility, electric utility services in Sioux Falls and city government. So I think this really does set up a conflict of interests. I'm not saying there's anything right. I'm saying it does set up a conflict of interests. And I think we have to be very careful about the appearance of impropriety. You're given, you acknowledge that you are on that board because XL Energy wishes to influence. XL Energy wishes to have allies, I understand. If it was purely informational and an opportunity for you to gain more knowledge to help you in your job, that'd be a very different situation. But that's not the arrangement here. I think there are other ways for you as a department that if you want to be better informed about utilities, there are other ways to do that besides sitting on an advisory board that does provide compensation, that does reimburse you for expenses or paid expenses, also gives you confidential information and expects you to hold that confidence. So I think people in the city of Sioux Falls, I think they have reason to wonder, is Mr. Eckroth serving our interests or serving the interests of another entity? I think it's problematic too, and I think it's important that we do deal with the facts. And I don't see it. I think the facts are different than the three advisory opinions from the past that the city attorney provided to us. Based on the facts presented to us, I think this is problematic. I would like to not be silent on the issue or ask for withdrawal. I think it's important for us to say we recommend that you not proceed with staying on that
respond? Just because I may have misheard. I thought the only potential would be if XL Energy had filed like a permit or something, you might have to resolve conflict. But are you truly a relationship, kind of a manager between XL Energy and the city?
No.
As Jack said?
No. So, first of all, to Jack's point, I think we have to be upfront, yeah. What they want are people that are well educated, understand their issues, and you know, can be advocates for these people that can help present facts in the community. With that said, I will tell you that from day one, XL has always been very careful about how they present stuff. It's always presented in an educational manner. There's never a lot of, we need to do this is what we want. You know, and they've been very open to listening. So I mean, I think the relationship, they are aware, you know, that they are dealing with public servants, and their whole purpose is education. And obviously, they want you to understand the implications of wind energy. They want you to understand, you know, those types of public policy types things, and why these things, you know, help with the energy portfolio. So that's the posture we take. So with that in mind, again, I don't think I'm on this board because I'm with the city. I think the request for me to stay on the board is because of my history with them. And the fact that they've never asked a city employee before, and they probably wouldn't if it wasn't myself. That said, we can't ignore the fact that I am a city employee and I'm a director, which I think does change the scope a little bit.
But again, do you have any influence over a relationship between the city and XL Energy?
No, they're an independent investor-owned utility. The only thing that would come into our office is if they're going to build a building, they need a building permit. They're placing new poles or something, and they need permits for that. They've got a building where they want to move various, those types of things.
And the permit policy is already in place.
Yes.
And you may get involved if there was an interpretive question about the policy draft that you have to follow.
But ultimately, it would go to the planning commission, go to board of adjustment, go to a public board to make the final decision. The staff has a recommendation.
Right.
I am certainly willing to withdraw or whatever works for this body. Again, it's not one of those things that I'm going to live or die on, but it is an interest to me. I wanted to bring it forward. I thought it'd be a good conversation, and not to take you down a rabbit hole, but what about nonprofit boards in town? So for example, I was a long-standing member on the Boy Scout board. I just got off. That was more of a time commitment than anything else. I just had to get rid of some stuff. And they're currently going through a chamber appeal that eventually will lead to a building permit. So, I mean, I'm just curious. I mean, I know that wasn't on the agenda. I don't want to take us down the rabbit hole, but I've served on a lot of boards through my years in Sioux Falls, all nonprofits. I just kind of, as I come to the city, I don't want to misstep. I want to be very open and honest about that. But I just kind of have that question too.
Question.
Jeff, I think I have a response to your question about boards. Your position is in that as director of planning, you touch everything that happens in the city. I can touch everything that happens 3 miles outside the city. And you don't give the option of cannot take off your hat. You can't walk into the room and say, now I'm a private citizen and I'm going to serve on this board. I think you would be facing a real challenge if you were on a board and that board was going to apply for some sort of a building permit or something like that. I think it would put you in a position where someone could criticize you, and independence is all about the appearance of independence, not necessarily just being independent or acting independent. So I can't think of another position other than perhaps the mayor or the chief of staff that would be so limited in what they were able to do because of their position in the city.
Thank you. Good input.
Mr. Question, good.
point you in. Yeah, a couple things I wanted to add just for your consideration. One is, I appreciate Mr. LaFollette's input. I'm going to respectfully disagree with one statement he made earlier, which was just to ensure that the board's considering the appropriate standard. The statement about if you have to ask, you probably shouldn't do it. You cannot apply, that's not the standard before us. Part of my concern would be the chilling effect that would have on city employees who are encouraged to bring these types of issues in front of the board precisely for these conversations. And because then you have a board with a quorum of well-regarded, well-trained, understanding ethics personnel who can help vet some of these to ensure, regardless of which way the decision goes, that appearance of impropriety is limited. So something for your consideration there. The other would be in the event that you make a decision one way or the other, that, again, I want to emphasize that limiting the decision to its facts. And there's been great conversation about that. Mr. LaFollette's comments just now. He's the director of planning. That's different than a librarian. It's different than someone else. Doesn't mean it's unethical. You still have to make that decision. But courts do that all the time when there's a concern that something is potentially a precedent or there's an argument to be made when really the facts are so narrow that it's limited to one issue.
So, Mr. Eckhoff.
Stacy, I want to thank Stacy for pointing that out. That the comment I made was in jest, but it gives rise to the point that there are certain times, certain positions that when you accept that position, you give up the right to say things in jest. And you're exactly right. I shouldn't have said that, but it's painful to clarify. So thank you.
But we have to acknowledge that you're not sitting here so we can't see your face. It's hard to tell what. So
we do appreciate your sense of humor. The question before us, which Mr. Eckhoff has put before us, is should he continue in the role of serving on the South Dakota Advisory Board to Xcel Energy? That is the question before us. So what position what advice, what opinion do we wish to share with Mr. Eckhoff?
Can I just offer one other comment before we do this? Sorry, I don't want to protract this any longer, but I will. I'm just trying to think of how we distinguish this even from the Karski opinion. In that instance, a council member, if I remember right, has to be on the chamber. Clearly the city funds. So is this, depending on how narrow we draft this, does it start to preclude that as well? That's my only concern. I don't necessarily disagree with everything people have said. I think Mr. Eckhoff needs to be careful, but I also think we need to carefully tailor this to not have an additional impact or chilling effect on people being out in the community, being part of boards, whether advisory or not, getting information that's important for them to carry out their job in their roles with the city.
If I may, I'm not a voting member of this, but obviously as the attorney, another consideration in that regard is the impact it has on city council members who are treated differently in the law, but also our city leadership and do make decisions across the range of well, it runs the gamut of all the issues that the city faces. And so there is more to this decision, as unique as the director of planning is. And I don't say this from an advocacy point of view, one way or the other. That's for the board. It's for that type of consideration. And as I look at the prior opinion, 19-1, which involved the library, the board distinguished expenses there as well. But while I think Ms. Roust is correct, at the time she was going regardless, so at issue, it was not an issue whether expenses apply, but the board has the opportunity to address that component as well if there's a concern from a perception point of view. Just things to think about in that regard, but you're right, I believe, in having the precedent discussion just because the implications are probably more immediate than we even realize. And there is a precedent of service from city leadership. Again, not the director of planning, that's what makes the seat in question. But it is one where there are other positions within the city that are that expansive. And, the fact that city councilor, Councilor Tyler is currently serving and others have in the past, if that's a reflection of it's really a non-issue, or if it's been unethical all along and nobody just thought to bring it up, I think those are just discussion items and nothing else.
Does anyone wish to offer a position for consideration by the board? Yeah, we do allow other testimony, so Mr. Danielson, if you come forward, we're going to swear you in, and then you can identify yourself and make your statement.
Do you solemnly affirm that the evidence you shall give relative to this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under the penalties of perjury?
I do. I'm Bruce Danielson from Sioux Falls. And I come often to these meetings, and I really appreciate the fact that Mr. Arkoff has come to ask this question, because it continues that chain of discussion that we've been having over the last few years about, what is proper and what is improper for city employees to be on certain boards and commissions. And there's a few others that we may still bring before the ethics board, because this touches on a question that he's raising, and I'm very happy that he's raising it. It was brought up, the librarian issue that was settled and discussed. She was already going to the meeting, and so she can sit on that board because it wasn't an influential position in the city or in that board. They were looking for the information. The police gift cards, that was brought up a couple of years ago. And it was a small amount, a diminutive amount, a de minimis amount. I mean, both ways. It was a small amount of money, and it shouldn't have affected anything, but still, it was a minor amount of money. And that was a concern to us that we're watching it and listening to it, that we shouldn't have the ability for city employees to go to restaurants and expect a free meal. And that is happening right now in this town, and it's actually upsetting store owners or restaurant owners that they were expected to do this. That's something that needs to be discussed. The Karski issue with the Chamber of Commerce, he was already a member of the chamber. He did get promoted into a position with the chamber that allowed him to maybe learn a little bit more, but he also would step out of the room if there was an issue with the chamber. Mr. Kiley is a member of the board, and when Excel Energy had a vote before the board the council last year, he did step out and leave the meeting for that vote. And everybody watched him and wondered what he was going to do, and he did the exact right thing. But in his situation, he may have been on the board, but he wasn't a decision maker day to day in the city government. And that was the difference that we saw as citizens watching this activity. That he didn't have inside information on how Sioux Falls does their rate structure or what is planned in the city government. He wasn't part of that process. So the question that several people have asked me, when they asked me if I was coming here today, was, how can you serve two masters? And even if Mr. Eckhoff isn't making any money, or Joe Smith, or anybody else in city government, they're in a decision-making process somewhere in the city, and they have inside information about what's going on with the city. Now they're learning inside information for somebody who is trying to find, as you used in your own words, they're building allies. And that begins to be a question. And from a citizen's point of view, watching somebody build allies for whatever purpose, 10 years from now, or from the corporation's point of view, that they're building something for 100 years from now, and they were able to build a relationship that caused an influence, is a real problem for citizens. the statement, and I've been in meetings and I've been in boards, I've been in these situations where they say, well, this isn't for public consumption, this is so that we can get something done. There's usually a red herring that says, I've got to be out of this room, because if we're discussing it here, that is something that I could get caught up in the future in some kind of a RICO violation or something. And that is very disturbing to somebody like me. So the perception is what we always have to watch out for. The de minimis amount that Mr. LaFollette has brought up many times in the past here, it doesn't matter if it's a penny, if it's a zero amount, if you got a sandwich at Subway. It doesn't matter anymore. You're starting to set a pattern in your ethics rulings that say that as much as I'm sure this man has done a marvelous job for all these years, and I've never heard a bad thing about this man in any way, shape, or form, I don't want you as a board to set a precedent that somebody else could use and cause future problems for the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dennison. Anything further you wanted to add, Mr. Eckhoff, before we deliberate here?
No, it's been a very good conversation. It is a balance, right? Because we are to build relationships in the community, so the community will work with the city, and so it's something we respect and then take care of with every day. So I'm very aware of that. With that, I'm certainly willing to withdraw my request. I think that might be the best route to go at this time. Unless there's a reason you want to have a policy discussion, then I'll record.
We can't,
I know you
we
can't
can't
tell me
advise
that.
you one way or another as to whether you should.
Can't blink one eye. No, I think.
So unless you do withdraw, we will.
Yeah, no. Hearing the testimony today and having the discussion, and my process is often talking and thinking out loud, I do withdraw the request at this time.
All right, we respect that, and again, we thank you for bringing the matter forward. And this has been I think, very informative and helpful discussion as a board. The next item on the agenda is we always have a time for public input on any matter. So if there are any members of the public here who wish to address the board, they may.
Bruce Danielson again. Since I am the only public here, as often happens, but I do want to thank you for coming and bringing this up, because this is really an important matter for those of us that have been trying for all these years to have some semblance out of the policy process. And I want to thank you dearly for coming and bringing this up. I wish we could have come to a decision on something like this, but I'm sure there'll be another one to come along and we'll be back involved. Thank you.
Is there any more business to come before this board? Hearing none, we stand adjourned. Thank you.